The custom drone build always begins with a few sketches, which are then transferred to your CAD software of choice. My recommendation is Fusion 360 and Inventor for their relative simplicity, though SolidWorks is also a great tool with its own benefits. The CAD process allows you to fit everything together in software before dealing with the actual physical materials to make sure there are no errors with your design, to allow you to purchase the required components such as brackets of a specific length, and also to reduce wastage. It is also important during the CAD step, especially if you have moving parts, to check for any potential obstruction between the drone sections. In my particular case, I use a folding arm design for easier storage, so I had to make sure none of the arms would get caught on the brackets during folding and unfolding. Thereafter, you can proceed to prepare the computer-aided manufacture or CAM files. My parts were cut with ArtCam Pro software, so all I needed to create was a PDF layout based on the size of the carbon fiber sheet I was going to use. You then proceed with cutting out, cleaning and sanding the various carbon fiber components, ready for assembly with the rest of the essentials such as the screws, brackets and electrical pieces. I decided to go with square tubing for the arms because of the much higher bend strength, as well as ease of assembly without complex aluminium end pieces. I'll just show you a few of the basic components, the electronic components that I'll have for this new drone design and how I've chosen to lay them all out. So, I'm not sure if much of it is recognizable, but if you look closely, you can actually see that the low voltage and the high voltage components have actually been isolated. So what we have here essentially is we have at the back the high voltage components. So this includes the main power cables that you can see coming out of the back, going into the power module, which is the one that gives voltage and current reports to the flight controller, and then that continues on into the electronic speed controllers. So the speed controllers are somewhere closer towards the center, and right underneath, because there are two branches that come from the main power source, there's one that goes to the ESCs and there's one that goes to the voltage regulators, which are right under here. So we have two 12-volt regulators and one 5-volt regulator. So the two 12-volt regulators, one of them serves purely the FPV camera and all related systems, including the transmitter and everything, and then the other one is dedicated to the lighting. The reason why I did this is because I was getting a bit of interference from the lights into the video feed, because the cables for the lights run alongside the three alternating current cables from the motors. So that introduces a lot of EMF into the power system. So that's why I isolated them. And the 5-volt runs both the minim OSD as well as the camera power. So there are two separate camera powers. This FPV camera runs on 12-volt, and the NDVI camera that I'm using runs on 5-volt. So that's the one that shares the power with the minim OSD. So now that that's out of the way, we can move on to the low voltage components. So right here you can see that the low voltage components are actually laid out on the sides and the front of the drone. So on the side, on the left side, we have the minim OSD, as I've mentioned earlier. So this is for overlay of flight data onto the camera, onto the video feed. And then right here we have the video transmitter. It's a 600 milliwatt. And if we continue, we have the FPV camera. And right here, what we have next is a telemetry device for the RadioLink radio system. So this gives a direct telemetry onto the radio controller of the RadioLink 89. Then on the far right, we actually have the R9DS, which is the receiver for the RadioLink system. And yeah, so that's the layout. So all the low voltage components are on the outside, which means the left and the right, as well as the front of the drone. And then the high voltage components are in the center, as well as the rear of the drone. Also, another thing that should be noted is that I've tried to include as many electronic components as possible onto the lower chassis piece of the drone, and this is primarily to make disassembly and reassembly as easy as possible. Also, another thing to note about the design is it includes 3 horizontal plates that are CNC machined from carbon fiber. Each plate is manufactured from a laminate of 7 layers of carbon fiber cloth, giving you a total thickness of about 2.2 millimeters. And this makes the pieces extremely strong. In fact, I feel like sometimes I may have over-engineered these parts, and that's because they are actually too strong. If you notice how many what are they called? The bracketing, the spacers that I'm using about 30 spacers on the top, and about it was about 14 at the bottom. This is actually a bit of overkill because the chassis itself, even without the topmost piece, is actually very sturdy, and there's almost no flex to it. So once I finish assembling the top piece, it actually won't flex at all. So I believe it will be very strong and also very light, because each of these chassis pieces, the top and the bottom one, each weigh on average about 70 grams, and the lower one weighs about 30 grams. So I expect this to be a very light drone. If I'm lucky, I may get it to about 1500 or 1600 grams, all up weight, without the battery. And then also we have the carbon fiber rods. I'm not sure if I mentioned them before. These are used for mounting the camera or the gimbal or whatever other component that you may have to mount. It's a 12 millimeter rod. Yeah, so that's the chassis setup. The drone is stored in a compact configuration, with all the arms folding backwards and the propellers detached using the Tarot quick-release plates. The drone legs are also unscrewed to make the package even more compact. For reassembly, each arm uses 2 screws, one being a permanent pivot screw and the other being a removable fastening screw, and both are held together using a butterfly nut to allow for tool-free tightening. Going forward, I would like to incorporate some sort of quick release mechanism that doesn't compromise too much on the overall structure of the drone, as losing sight of loose screws in the field can be a nightmare. As stated earlier, the drone legs are attached to the body using a single screw, and I opted for these fixed legs over retractable ones due to the lighter weight, which can in turn increase flight time. Finally, the propellers are attached using a quick release mechanism, which saves valuable time during assembly, especially when in the field. And here's what you end up with as the final result. Thank you for watching this video. In part 2, I will cover the flight characteristics of the drone, as well as the other operational features. Please like and subscribe for more content like this, and in case of any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below.